confirmation of the chair.
Yes, thanks, Chair. We thought it'd be helpful just to put this item on for a bit of information and context for members. As this is the first formal meeting of the Audit and Governance, there was an induction session back in March. This is the first time that the committee meets formally. You would normally expect to have appointment of chair on the agenda for the first meeting. Under the Combined Authorities Constitution, the appointment of chair for Audit Committee is a decision of the Combined Authority itself. So in our context, the equivalent of full council, a local authority. So that was undertaken at its meeting on the 28th of June, where it elected to appoint Councillor Dave Merritt of City of York Council as chair. There have been discussions this morning and in the past few days about appointing a vice chair for the committee. So that's something that we're going to take away and bring a paper to the next meeting of the committee for. So we'll be seeking nominations from the committee for that, and I'm sure the chair will speak to members individually about that in the meantime.
I think that's very important. Yeah, we represent different authorities, different areas, having some spread of responsibility. I think will be important for the functioning of this to be an effective committee. So we'll deal with that at the next meeting, if that's all right. Okay. Perhaps as part of our constitutional review, we'll put that oversight. Right. Okay. Apologies for absence. We've received apologies from Councillor Mark Waters, who's independent from the City of York Council. Okay. And declarations of interest. Are there any?
I just had a quick message on this point. Obviously, we can accept declarations of interest at the meeting today. All members will be sent today a new register of interest form for the Combined Authority. You'll have all completed one many times at your own constituent authorities, but as the Combined Authority is a standalone authority, there's still a requirement to complete and submit one for the Combined Authority, which will then be published and available for inspection in the usual way. So covering email will be going out with that, as well as instructions for any sensitive interests that members may have. So I'd be grateful if members could just complete those as per usual and return them back. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, public participation. There are no registrations to speak today, although I understand that someone has expressed an interest in seeing what we're up to, and we'll be looking at the recording in due course. Right, 5, change to the composition and quorum of the Audit and Governance Committee. Written report by Rachel. If you would like to speak to that, Rachel.
Thank you, Chair. Members, this report can be found from pages 3 onwards and relates to an amendment to the Constitution of the Combined Authority that directly affects the Audit and Governance Committee. When I prepared the report in Word, it showed the draft changes that would have been very easy for members to see, but the transition over to ModGov and publication meant that the draft change version wasn't accessible on the online version. Will, I think, has got copies. If anybody would like to see the track change copies so you can see the amendments that are being made to the Constitution, they can be distributed if needs be. The report is for noting only, and the amendments can be found from paragraph 4 onwards. In essence, they relate to membership of the committee should be 9 members, not 13. There will be 1 co-opted member, excuse me, who is the independent member on the committee who will have no voting rights. There'll be 2 substitute members from each constituent council appointed from nominations received. Such appointments will be politically inclusive. Provision for independent person, the standards to attend meetings if needs be. Again, they will have no voting rights. Inclusion of the independent member and person's qualification details, and the quorum being 6 members rather than 9, which reflects the non-voting capacity of the independent person and independent member. I'm happy to take any questions on the paper. Before I do, I'd also like to apologise. There is a paper going to next week's Combined Authority meeting, which is asking the Combined Authority to confirm certain amendments that it's an addition to delegations in relation to the Adult Education Board. And also the Adult Education Policy and Procedures. It was an urgent amendment. Ideally, amendments need to come through Audit Governance Committee first for their consultation. So I'll ask Will, I'll send the papers to Will, and then they'll be circulated across Audit Governance. If anybody has any comments, if they can let me know. But I do apologise for that. Take any questions on the paper?
Right, Councillor Broadbank.
Well, no member is having a casting vote, right? What happens if you get an equal number of people turning up?
Any motion that has been put is not carried if it's not got a majority.
Well, have you got the same number of people?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if there's a motion put and it doesn't receive a majority, then the motion is not carried.
Yes. Okay.
For Melly.
Chair, I've got a couple of questions, please. So there'll only be one substitute member from each constituent council. So does that mean 2 members from one constituent council can't attend and someone else substituted? They're not a nominated substitute, or does that just mean having a vacancy in the committee for that meeting?
We are looking at the whole issue of substitutes, and actually I'm going to report into the combined authority over the summer around this on an informal basis, because originally we were going to have every member was then going to have a substitute, but that potentially could cause issues in terms of register of interest. We'd have to keep an awful lot of papers on the off chance that a substitute might be appointed. So we will be looking at that. So I can report back on that. The status quo for the minute, but nothing is set in stone with this.
Thank you. My other question was about including non-voting members in the calculation of quorum.
Yeah.
Is that unusual to include non-voting? Being 2/3 of the total members rather than 2/3 of the voting members.
What we based the constitution, and I'll come to this when I talk about the constitution review. We based the constitution on Greater Manchester because it was as close as what York had in terms of functions and powers. But we do need to look at that as a whole. I think an issue that we had at the last meeting, which was the reason why it had to be informal, was because the quorum figures weren't up, because we didn't have in place, which we still don't at the moment, the independent member and the independent person. So that might just be a temporary amendment to the constitution, and it might be going forward as a committee you make a decision that you want to include the independent member and the independent person who are non-voting members as part of those quorum figures. But for the minute, in order to ensure that any business conducted was lawfully conducted and we could get these meetings up and running, that was the position, and that's the change.
Councillor Lunn.
Does it mean that the substitutes will be a named substitute and only that named substitute can act for either authority?
At the minute, that's what we're going to look at. But as I say, over the summer, I want to get a steer from the combined authority as to what their thoughts are on this and the practicalities, because we're trying to weigh up everybody having to sign the register of interests and keep all the records up to date if they're maybe not going to attend the meeting. Yeah.
Register of interest, but surely if we were more flexible, I mean, both authorities have audit committees and both authorities have people on those audit committees who are practiced within audit.
Yeah.
And it would make it easier if we're more flexible from our point of view, not from the administrative point of view. I understand that totally.
Take that on board, and I can certainly raise that to the combined authority over the summer to seek their views on that.
Can I welcome Councillor Andrew Hollier to the meeting? He's the chair of the Audit and Governance Committee in York and has a question.
Apologies for the past. Just 2 things on that point. This, I think, is essential that we widen the pool of substitutes. We've got an independent member as well, and obviously just isn't part of the group. So So it's slightly confusing who would substitute for him if he wasn't here as he isn't today. I think as well in York, we changed our constitution to stop members from one political group being substituted by another. So it's slightly odd to have a kind of different approach here instead of just
And that's certainly something that we could take away as part of the review of the constitution as a whole, which is a later agenda item. But long term, that's something that we can certainly look at. I know the position at York and when I was at York at that time. So I can certainly link in with Bryn as well around those constitutional changes, because we're trying to get as aligned as we possibly can, bearing in mind we are a different authority to York and North Yorkshire, but we're trying to align as much as we can so that it does make life a little bit easier for all councillors coming to the table and attending these meetings.
I just
Goodrich.
sorry, I just wanted to raise the fact that I am uncomfortable with the quorum including the independent members with non-voting rights. I think it's really important that we get a balance of voting members on the committee, and to include them as part of quorum these things. Not to do that. I think it's really important that we have substitute members and that the quorum is dependent on the number of voting members of the committee.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? So, Holly.
I just think so there's just one independent member.
We've not gone out for recruitment yet, so we don't know what uptake we're going to get. We don't know whether we're going to see what uptake we do get. I'm timing the recruitment. At the moment, there is a big recruitment process for the business board, and I'm waiting for that to finish before we look to embark on independent person. We've got everything ready to go. It's just a case of we wanted to get that first recruitment out of the way before we embark on the next set of recruitment. It may be that we have more than one. It may be that we have substitute situation. We really don't know until we've gone out to recruitment, but I can certainly feed back to members at the next meeting or even ahead of that as to how that process goes.
I guess it would be useful to have two on with us.
Exactly. Yeah. 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 That's accepted. Yeah. It's just from knowing previously in previous recruitment campaigns I've done for other authorities, it's sometimes been difficult to get members. So the more the merrier if we can get that pool, but if not, then we can still operate with just that one independent member.
Okay. If there are no more questions, thank you very much for that item. And let's move on then to item 5, the internal audit, information governance, risk management and counter fraud work programme 2024-2025. Report as the head of the internal audit. Mr. Cutts.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. From page 7 onwards, you will see the covering report followed by Verito's combined plan, which includes the 4 items which the Chair just mentioned. If I just briefly dip in and out of 1 or 2 aspects of the plan, and happy to receive any questions after that. Page 11, we talk about with the internal audit service, which I'm your internal audit manager, and in planning the work, we, in the table at the bottom of page 11, highlight some of the key risks that we've picked up. We've already done some work linked to adult education because some of the DFE responsibilities require some initial work to help support officers in some initial submissions. And that is one which, even without risk register, we all know is a significant risk and something that its inclusion in the plan helps support the organisational aims going forward. So we had conversations to kind of allow the highest priorities to be identified. With our planning process, we have flexibility, so it's not like the oil tanker starting every year and you can never change your priorities. So we may, if that is the case, jiggy around 1 or 2 of the audits, but always informing members when those instances take place and updating them as part of the reporting to this committee. So page 11, so shorter than page 12 with the information governance, which highlights, I guess, the increasing challenges of managing all the different aspects of things such as data protection and freedom of information, which is one of the 3 supplementary services which Verito helps provide to the new authority. My colleague Deborah Leonard leads on that and hopefully provide sufficient depth on some of the subtlety or the specific differences of that work and support. And there's a lot of, as there will be with all of the services, but it's working with the other parts of the organisation to make sure the aims in managing those aspects of information governance are joined up, even though some of them might involve enable, fire, plus different other parts of the organisation as well. On page 14, risk management is led by my colleague Conor Munro's an assistant director. He will be kind of more a facilitator to help support the organisation move the arrangements from where they are now, which means at the moment you don't have as an organisation a risk management policy or a strategy. The procedures need to be refined, and then through a journey doing that, we can help support, provide that first snapshot of what a risk register would look like. And Conor, in paragraph 16 on page 14, has just broken that down into a little bit more detail. There's a separate to kind of the audit role. I have nothing to do with it in that sense, which allows my independence when I'm drawing my views as the head of internal audit. But it was part of early conversations with the authority that it's a key aspect of the internal control framework for those risk management arrangements to be brought into kind of working order as soon as is practicable. And just finally on page 15, our counter fraud colleagues, which is one of the other services Verito provides, has the ability to help some specialist support on either an ad hoc or a raising awareness nature. And we've agreed a small portion of work linked to that. As I mentioned, I'm happy to answer any questions that members might have. Thank you.
Councillor Lunn.
Yeah, thank you. It's time to say I'm very confident in what Verito will do, because they work with and understand both authorities. In fact, they're owned by both authorities, and I'm sure you'll hit the ground running. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Can I just ask a question? Your Verito's providing these services on information governance, on risk management and so on, obviously separate from your internal audit. How do you deal with audit issues and governance issues, audit of governance issues regarding those 2 other services that you provide? How is that handled?
I suppose in certain aspects it might depend. The benefit of being an organisation is, say, on the information governance side, we might find weaknesses in internal control that involves some additional audit work or not. But we will, in that instance I mentioned, we will discuss that and change the audit side of things. I know it's a bit of a North Yorkshire reference, but we've done that in the last 6 months, linked to particular risks on 1 or 2 areas. And it would be the same, I think, with that conversation. We would, with my, I suppose, audit head on, I'm forming a judgment on risk management, internal control and governance. But in the reflection that it's the first year of a new organisation and those arrangements are evolving and will have some things that need support or improvement. So I think it would be triaged to me in the first instance, and with my responsibilities, I would consider what was additionally needed in the respect of certain things. It tends to be for some significant weaknesses, as an example with North Yorkshire, just mentioned it's in the public domain. When we provided our overall opinion at the end of the year, we highlighted information governance as one of the areas of potential weakness for the annual governance statement. So that's where I could absorb the good work of a colleague without the need for doing additional work, but just reflecting with my responsibilities what I felt the committee needed to know in respect of how it's being highlighted and taken on board by the council as part of the annual governance approach. hopefully that's.
Okay. Has anyone else got any questions or comments on this? No, thank you very much. Let's move on then. Item 7, the external audit update. And Mr. Outerbrook.
I'm Chair to Mr. Outerside. We've been appointed as the external auditors for the foreseeable future for the Combined Authority. It's fair to say at this stage it's pretty early days in terms of scoping our work and what that will look like. However, in common with all of our local government clients, it will be an opinion on financial statements. We'll be discharging our wider responsibilities and completing our work in around value for money. At the moment, we're working with officers to see what that will look like in terms of planning and when we'll be able to complete that work. So at this stage, it is really, really early days. And can't really say anything more than that at this point in time.
Okay. Questions, comments from members? No? Okay. Thank you for that. Right, the draft annual governance statement. Rachel.
Chair. This paper can be found within the supplementary agenda. Again, another apology. It needed time to go to officers with it being a new document. And I echo colleagues, it is a new combined authority. So this is not as detailed a document as maybe you have seen previously within your constituent authorities, where you've been up and running for a very long time. This is over a snapshot over a 3-month period from December until March. Members are asked to consider the contents of the statement and endorse those contents in order that it can be published at a later date as part of the annual accounts. By way of overview, the statement provides an annual review of effectiveness of the combined authority's internal controls and governance arrangements. The document should look back at the last 12 months, but also look to the future as well. So we're looking back at the first 3 months of the inception of the combined authority and also looking at the next 12 months. We really would welcome further input from members as this next year progresses. So the suggestions, and I'll come to them in a minute, of what we're going to look at over the next 12 months is very much a bit of a blank canvas, really, because we are so new. But there's just a bit of a snapshot of some of the things that we'll be looking at and that we're inviting the Audit and Governance Committee to look at as well in the next 12 months. As I've said, the period was very, very short for 23-24. The combined authority was incepted in the middle of December. The first phase of staff transitioned on the 1st of February this year, with the second transition of police, fire and crime on the 7th of May. And it's expected that there'll be a lot more detail in coming years' annual governance statements. But just to summarise the draft that's before members today, there's an introduction and background to the purpose at page 7. It sets the scene, includes the corporate governance framework that the combined authority have adopted. The legal, strategic and policy context is set out at page 8. That includes the composition of the combined authority and associated provisions that come with the order that created the combined authority that was published and went live towards the end of 2023. At paragraph 2.5, there's an outline as to what the business board will look like. As I said when I was reporting on the previous paper, at the moment there's a recruitment exercise gone out for business board members that's been launched by Mayor David Skane. And I think the closing date on that is in the coming weeks and months. And there's an aim of launching that board later this year. Paragraph 2.9 provides an outline of the work that will be undertaken by that business board. Within page 10, there's the initial framework that the combined authority are working to. Excuse me, there's a paper coming to next week's combined authority meeting with an updated framework which aligns with the Mayor's priorities. So we tried to align the framework so that it meets those priorities going forward. So there's a refreshed framework that's going to next week's meeting. There's also a table at page 11 which shows the governance arrangements at paragraph 2.18. In essence, you've got within the combined authority, audit and governance, one overview scrutiny committee, and then there's a business board and the skills and employment working group. The three boxes on the right hand side feature the committees for what was the Office for Police, Fire, Crime and Commissioner, which is now Office for Police, Fire, Crime and Commissioning. So you'll see there that there is a joint independent audit committee. That's the police side of the house, independent audit committee, which services the fire and rescue side of the house. We are looking at a review within the next 12 months of the governance arrangements for each of those committees, and in particular the interplay between this committee and those committees. Paul and myself, we sat in on the most recent JIAC and IAC committees, and they were really, really keen to start to work with yourselves as members of the main Combined Authority Audit and Governance Committee. So I think there's some work which could really reap some benefits for the Combined Authority to be undertaken there. Page 12 outlines the work undertaken to date. So the creation of the Constitution, skills and working group, internal horizon scanning. The leadership team is in its infancy, still has some interim posts, which hopefully the Combined Authority will look to recruit some senior permanent positions in the coming months that will really shore up that leadership team within the Combined Authority. Section 6 at page 14 sets out the focus for the coming year, the kinds of things that within that focus will deal with the appointment of the independent member, an independent person for this committee, seeking the views of the Audit and Governance Committee regarding the Code of Conduct and also the associated procedures. I don't know the setup in North Yorkshire, but I certainly know in the City of York there is a separate Joint Standards Committee to the Audit and Governance Committee, because we're not anticipating, such would at this stage, there being many code of conduct or standards matters that the Combined Authority will be tasked with dealing with. The decision was taken to amalgamate, so part of the Audit and Governance Committee's remit will be to look at standards and the code of conduct. So that's the work coming up in the future for the committee. There'll be a review of the Code of Corporate Governance and other associated documents. There's going to be some work around embedding the advisory boards of the Combined Authority into the structure of the Combined Authority, developing Mayor Scaife's priorities over the coming 3 or 4 years, work around the governance structure, as I've said, the JIAC, the IAC, how that interplays and feeds into the Combined Authority Audit and Governance Committee. Recruitment of permanent leadership team, as I've said, development of internal audit arrangements, a review of the Constitution, which I won't give a spoiler alert, that's a later agenda item, and finally embedding the audit governance and overview and scrutiny arrangements. I'm happy to take any questions on that draft page.
Okay, Councillor Lund, thank you.
Sorry to keep we have a joint independent audit committee for police and crime and for fire and rescue, as well as our combined authority audit committee. Is this over auditing, or are these things so specialist that that's what they need?
What we've tried to do with the transition in of police, fire and crime, and also the former LEP as well, is try and keep an as-is model for now. It's purely a temporary measure. In terms of policing, the Joint Independent Audit Committee is a must-have. That's a legislative requirement. In terms of fire and rescue, there's a little bit more flexibility around that. So over the coming 12, 18 months, something that we'll be exploring as officers with yourselves, committee members, and also that JIAC and IAC is there any joint working? Is there any merit in pulling certainly the IAC element of audit into this committee so that we've got that one policing statutory committee and then our combined authority and audit committee. So there is a lot of work which we will keep members updated on, but that is something that we're exploring at the moment. If we do have to have the 2 separate committees or 3 separate committees going forward, what we are looking as a team of officers is trying to have a uniformed approach. So if a member of the public touches or interplays with the GIAC meeting, the papers, the publication procedures, the quoracy, all looks the same. The meetings look very similar in terms of the agenda and the layout. So they're looking at one singular formula, regardless of which committee it is.
Thank you. So basically, we'll start and see.
Yes, very early days.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, any other questions or comments? I just raise one. Obviously, the new authority is still getting itself up and running, but nonetheless, there are very significant sums of money being dispersed in terms of projects, and particularly on the capital side. I wondered whether one of the things that we ought to look at in the first year is that those systems, whether we're getting value for money, whether there's clear evaluation of schemes, decision making, and so on. So I wondered if that was one area we should pay a particular bit of attention.
Certainly. I mean, as Debbie's already mentioned, she's got a bit of a smile on her face. On Monday, our substantive Section 73 officer starts with a combined authority, Mike Russell. So, he brings with him a wealth of experience, certainly from a combined authority point of view. He's previously worked in a combined authority, and he'll be attending these meetings. So he certainly will be able to assist members in relation to that. We can certainly bring a paper in the future around that.
If it's helpful, Chair, as well, aside from a formal paper for members to consider at committee, if the committee members thought it might be helpful to have a bit of an induction or a training session on the assurance and value for money procedures that we have in place, we'd be quite happy to put that on as officers, where we can discuss in some depth what the combined authority has in place. Because you are quite correct, it's significant sums of money, and we do have an assurance framework in place that prescribes the process that will follow to make sure that value for money is achieved. But if you'd like to understand where those little interventions come, the kind of levels that we're talking about, and how money can be spent in the various different pots, we can do that outside of the committee setting, if that will allow me to have a bit more of an open and candid conversation.
Yeah, we do that as a team's thing, since no decisions are being made.
But absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm seeing nods around the table, so yes, I think we would like to do that.
We'll get Mike in place and installed first, and then on day 2, I'm letting him have day 1 and day 2. We can ask him to that.
Okay, if there's no other questions or comments on that paper.
So there was just one recommendation, Chair.
Yeah.
Okay, and that was that members consider and endorse a draft annual governance statement publication.
Hey, are we happy to do that? Nods of assent. Yep. Okay, that is agreed. Thank you. Right, review of the constitution of the combined authority.
Thank you, Chair, me again. I will keep this presentation of this report relatively brief, because I am welcoming any comments, good, bad or indifferent, or any observations or views on the review of the Constitution. I've already spoken about the Constitution that's currently being adopted. It's in its final form at the minute, but there was always going to be a provision that in its first 12-18 months of the creation of the combined authority, that a full-scale review would take place. We've based it on Manchester. We are now becoming York and North Yorkshire, and every combined authority is different in terms of its powers and what it can deliver in its regions. So we want to make it York and North Yorkshire eyes going forward. This is not a small piece of work. This will be a large piece of work. I anticipate it will probably take around 12 months. I've been involved at a previous authority in a constitution review, and it's no small piece of work. What I'm asking members to consider today is the establishment of a working group who can undertake a review of the Constitution. It will be part by part, stage by stage. In my mind, but I welcome members' views on this. I'm thinking a working group with a standing committee, effectively, and a core committee of 4 members of this Audit and Governance Committee. But then if we discuss something, for example, such as Part 9, which is police, fire and crime, that we bring in the JIAC and the IAC committee members, we bring in officers of that specialism. Likewise, financial regulations, contract procedure rules, we can bring in colleagues from procurement and the contracts legal team within North Yorkshire Council who currently use on an SLA. So we could bring in specialists. The other thing that's been happening since January is I've listened to members from both councils. In particular, there were 2 meetings of a joint audit and governance and overview and scrutiny committee at City of York during January, February time, where I took on board all of the comments that were made by members. We went through page by page the Constitution. I think that offer was also made to North Yorkshire Council. We received an awful lot of comments, observations back. I've collated comments and observations from officers as well, and members of the public have also sent in their feedback. There were some immediate things that we needed the combined authority to look at and consider, which they did during February and March. There were some things which weren't so urgent, which I've collated and saved as part of this piece of work that we'd be asking the working group to do. So the working group will look at each section. We can timeline and plan out what the next 12 months or 10 months of this piece of work will look like. And then we can bring in the experts, subject matter experts in their field. We can even look to bring in members of the public for feedback, consultation at certain points, other members who aren't part of the Audit and Governance Committee who want to have a say within each of your authorities. It can be very much what you want it to be. So I will pause there to take any questions, comments, observations. No. So what we're inviting is if anybody wishes to be on the working group, if they can let Will, myself, Paul know, and we'll be in touch around that.
Okay, so I see you nods around the head. Does anyone want to make any comments or ask any questions on that? Or are we happy to come to move to a decision on this? So, yes, okay. So is there agreement that we should set up a working group broadly along the lines that have been outlined? Yes, that's nodding. So that's agreed. Is that enough for you to be getting on with?
If people can express an interest, if it can be within the next week, that just gives us an idea as to how many. And then what I'll do is I'll bring a report back to each Audit and Governance Committee so that members are fully briefed, the wider committee are briefed on any updates, what we've been discussing, the kinds of things we're talking about, so everybody can get an input then.
And clearly it should reflect the balances as far as we can in terms of the names that come forward. Okay. Right. Thank you very much for that. Which brings us to the final item, or almost the final item, Audit and Governance Work Plan 2024-2025.
Thank you, Chair. In future, members will receive a covering report with this, but at the moment it's a bit of an academic illustration of the committee's work programme so far and what's coming up in the coming year. It might look slightly onerous at first glance because it's quite a page full. What I would say is it's probably been a little over-egged in this first draft. This is a piece of work that I've developed alongside colleagues to try and get a picture of the work that falls within the remit of audit and governance and areas where audit and governance may wish to review in the coming year. But as the committee develops and as when Mike Russell starts as Section 73 officer on Monday, this will naturally develop at quite some pace. I'm sure things will be reprioritised, moved around, and things may well drop off or pieces be added on. There are quite a lot of blank items on here where we haven't got dates attributed to them yet. Some of that is partly for the reasons I've explained, that it's an illustration of what the committee may look at, but also due to the nature of audit and governance, there's a lot of retrospective review of the previous financial year. And as we're not yet in that next financial year, we don't yet have these items to review. So that's the programme that we're looking at the moment. I suspect the one that you see at the next committee meeting in October will look very different. But if members have particular thoughts about any item of it, anything you'd like to see added, or anything you think is outside of the remit of the committee and we should be handling elsewhere, and quite happy to have a conversation and answer any questions, Chair.
So we have work ahead. So any comments or questions at this stage?
I'm pleased to see that we're looking at that kind of fraud almost every time, because this is something which always engenders our interest.
I know, and there will be other things, because in the Constitution, the minutes of the JIAC are meant to come here. Obviously, because they've not had quorum meetings recently, there are no minutes at the present time, but there will be in due course. The Section 73 officer has an annual statement that's also mentioned in the Constitution. Will appear here. I'm not sure if that was actually covered on a slightly different label, but yeah.
And another point to probably add, I'm sure all members will be aware, we've recently had an election and a change of government. The approach to devolution may well change. We're not entirely certain what direction that will go in, but it looks more likely that there will be more funding and responsibilities coming to combined authorities in the coming years, and that may well mean additional pots of money with different funding requirements, different audit regulations, and so on. And so these will feed into the plan in future if they transpire.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. Right, finalise emergent business. I have none. I was not notified of any beforehand, so that concludes the meeting. Thank you very much for your attendance, involvement. Wish you a safe journey home.